With the sad news that Yamaha will no longer be offering the R1 as a road bike, we thought it was a good time to look at possibly the worst kept secret in motorcycling, the new Yamaha R, in this case, the R9. We're going to talk through a few of the specs, what we think it's going to be like, and do we think it's a worthy successor to the original legendary R1. As has happened with so many Supersport bikes, the EU emissions regulations and general homologation rules have made it harder and harder to keep these legendary fire-breathing superbikes road legal. So from 2025, we will no longer get an R1 or an R1M in road trim. Boo! But cheer you up, because on the flip side, Yamaha has just announced, finally, the new R9. Now, I think this has got to be one of the worst kept secrets in motorcycling. There's been so much sort of chatter and, oh, they must be, oh, they've got to be doing one. Oh, are they, aren't they, are they, aren't they? But finally, they've admitted it. The R9 is on its way. It's going to be in dealers at the beginning of March 2025. Now, when the R7 was launched a few years back, there was a lot of criticism because what everyone wanted was a repeat of the old school four-cylinder homologation special of the 90s, and what they got was an MT-07 with cool bodywork and a bit more racy geometry and chassis. In reality, phenomenal little bike. Forget all the complaints about it's not a proper four-cylinder superbike, blah, 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 blah. The R7 hit the sweet spot of having enough power to be entertaining, light enough to throw around like it didn't matter, and cheap enough that when you did crash it, it wasn't the end of the world. But there always comes a point where you start wanting that little bit more performance, that little bit more power. And if you're asking people to start considering stepping off litre sports bikes, stepping off fire-breathing Supersport 600s, you need to fill that void. And I think the new R9 is going to fill it very well indeed. With a wet weight of 195 kilos, so lighter than the original bike, it also makes 119 horsepower, which, okay, that's nothing like the original R1 made, but it is bang on a par with the best four-cylinder Supersport weapons. Now that engine that they're putting in the new R9 is obviously the MT-09 engine. If you've ridden one of them, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a phenomenal motor, and one that they've been evolving for the last decade or so to give us the latest one, which we tested on the MT-09 SP. We'll put a link somewhere here, but it is a cracker of an engine. Loads of mid-range, fantastic sound, but then the ability to rev it right up to the red line when you want to stretch its legs between corners. That blend of mid-range and top end means you've got a bike that on the road gives you punch out of a turn without needing to be tapped up and down the gears a million times, but on track lets you scream it all the way down the straights and give you that kind of nice, warm, happy race bike feeling. Now the next concern I always have when you hear the announcement of a new, actually fairly reasonably cheap sports bike is, are they just going to made it boring with high bars and some sort of pseudo sports thing that's not actually worth taking on track? Well, based on what they did with the R7, where they didn't make many concessions towards comfort, I think the R9 looks to be in good shape. From Yamaha's press release, they've showed that it's actually got similar geometry. The seat's pretty high, the bars are pretty low. It's actually a little bit shorter seat to bar than the R7, and the pegs are a little bit lower, but again, it's all in a nice tight triangle that screams sports bikes and, yeah, aching backs on a long journey, but that's what we want from a sports bike, right? Elsewhere around the bike, actually it doesn't look like they've skimped too much. It's got a proper alloy delta box chassis, a la early R1s. It's got good KYB forks, it's got a fancy KYB shock with a piggyback reservoir. It's got a top yoke that looks like it came straight off the R1. It's a properly nice looking thing. Now the proof is always going to be in the actual riding of it, but doing the spec sheet juggle and ogling the pictures on Yamaha's press release, I'm properly excited. I think this new R9 could be one of the most entertaining three-cylinder sports bikes on the road, and that's coming from someone who is a huge Daytona 675 fan. Now, as you'd expect from a latest gen sports bike, there's a pretty high specification of electronic rider aids with the traction control, slide control, the 6-axis IMU, all the fancy tick boxes that say it's a proper modern superbike. Personally, in the 119-ish horsepower mark, I don't massively consider those super important, but if you're looking for something to really push on track and have that safety margin, it is nice to have them, and if you don't like them, just turn them off. On recent Yamahas, they've done a really good job of making those modes in a way that you can turn off the rider aids when you want to ride without interference. So I think it's probably a good thing for both sides of the camp. Now, the last thing I want to say about the R9 is the price point. It's pretty interesting. I was fully expecting it to be 14-ish, and they've announced a guide price of 12,250 quid in the UK. That makes it a very interesting proposition. And when you compare it to Honda's CBR 600RR, I'm looking forward to some group tests next year. They've done a really nice job of the pricing. It doesn't look like they've cheaped out on the spec, and if it's put together and rides as well as an MT-09 does, it is going to be an absolute riot. We'll find out more at the beginning of next year. The launch is rumoured to be around March time, so hopefully it'll be all smiles, skids and wheelies, and a worthy successor to the legend that is the original R1. Long live superbikes.